Great. Hi, Maria.
Hey, Steph. How you doing?
Good. How are you doing today?
Pretty good, pretty good. Expecting some snow for like the first time this winter, so that should be exciting to see.
Nice, nice. We're expecting some too. I'm excited to be back for the podcast, talking with you again. Um, this little intro is so funny. I feel like everyone who makes a podcast must do this thing where they like say, "Hi, how are you?" And then they press record and then they say, "Hi, how are you?" again.
I know, I know it feels like we should just press record when we start every time.
I know. It's funny because now I listen to other podcasts and they are having these like organic starts to their conversations. And I'm like, are you doing that for a second time? Because I know you weren't recording when you walked into the room together. So that makes me laugh. But anyway, so let's summarize what we're coming in with today. So for anyone that might be watching or listening to this episode, we are coming in with sort of a part two to our last episode, in which I was talking with Maria about her experience of having recently had a miscarriage and what that was like. And kind of, I think, pulling back the curtain a little bit and when I say that, I mean like, this is not something people talk very openly about, despite the fact that it's extremely common. And so we wanted to just have an open and transparent dialogue about that and share with anyone that might be listening what that experience was like. And I hope that if anyone is joining in today, go back and listen to that one. But also, if you're just joining with this episode today, I think that hopefully there will be plenty in our conversation that even if you haven't listened to that episode, you can still get something out of this one. So really take your own journey with the podcast. Just because it's a part two doesn't mean that you absolutely must go back and listen. I think you can kind of pick up here too if you want to. So we talked last time, and Maria, throw anything out that you feel like I'm missing. But what I remember us talking about last time was like how you found out that you were pregnant and what those early weeks were like. And then some of what was going on for you physically that cued you in to the feeling of like, something's wrong. I need to get this checked out. You talked about what you pursued as far as like what medical stuff you pursued to try to get answers about what was going on for you, and how you kind of discovered that you were having a miscarriage and like what that was like. And then once you got in and talked with your provider, you shared a little bit in the episode about like what options your provider presented you with about, yes, this is happening. Here is what we can do to help your body along. And then you talked about what you chose to do, what it was like, what you wish you knew. And then coming in today, we were going to kind of pick up with like what the healing journey has been like for you since then, physically and emotionally and relationally, and what your like journey towards, you're still on the journey. You still want to become a parent. What has that looked like in the aftermath of this having happened? And kind of maybe going from there, like next steps, healing and next steps, I think is what today is about. How's that sound to you as far as a summary? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that was a great summary. I agree. I think, first part of this two-part episode about miscarrying is, the first part was a lot of just exactly like you said, what was it like for me? And part of why I was sharing that and decided to share that is from a lens of from a lens of a mental health practitioner wanting to take that step forward to open up a conversation for maybe women out there who feel uncomfortable starting that conversation, and just show what that might be like, what that might look like. And not everybody has the same way of processing emotions. For me, speaking about my experiences helps me a lot. I'm a very verbal processor. So that is one way of working through a difficult emotional journey. But yes, so part 2, I think, is more of that, okay, well, what next, right? And that's exactly what you just described, Steph. So I think it was a great summary. I think I want to, I was talking to my sister-in-law about our last episode, and I was explaining to her what it was like to express myself in a way that I knew people that I don't actually know might be listening to this. And her reaction was, you sound so well adjusted to the situation, right? But she knows from experience in the moment when it was happening that I wasn't as emotionally stable in that second, right? In those minutes of it. And so she encouraged me, and I think it was important, and I really appreciate the encouragement to just kind of put out there that just because in this moment I'm able to talk about it without appearing emotional or overly emotional doesn't mean that that experience wasn't extremely difficult and dark for a period of time. I say that to be able to just put out there that if somebody is like watching this and being like, oh, well, I can't relate to her because clearly she has a good handle on this situation. That's because of some of the work I did, which is what I want to talk about today, right? I want to be relatable in a sense that just because I have a lot of knowledge and skill around emotional regulation doesn't mean that life doesn't kind of knock you on your ass sometimes. And this was one of those experiences where it did. So it's much easier in retrospect now to be like, yeah, well, this happened and I'm really positive and I'm looking forward to the future. And all of that is true. But it is also very true that in the moments of the experience of realizing I was miscarrying and losing something, grief really does set in pretty quickly and pretty hard. Even if it was just for a brief moment of having something, because as I described in the last episode, it wasn't very far along in the pregnancy. But it doesn't matter how far along. Could be 2 weeks, could be 5 weeks, could be 10, 12, could be, really further along in the pregnancy, and all of the different stages of pregnancy, depending upon when people unfortunately lose a pregnancy, could present different challenges, could present different options that their providers might give them. So I say all that to just put out there that my experience is not everybody's experience, but hoping that my sharing of it makes it a little bit more normalized, that it is so common. And you said, Steph, that pulling back the curtain, so to speak, was in an effort to share so that people see how common it is. And we talked about the statistic of it being, it's pretty agreed upon that it's like 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 known pregnancies end in a miscarriage. And most of them happen within the first trimester, within the first 3 months. But in between recording the last episode and this one, I was watching a documentary on fertility and labor and birth and all of that. And one of the doctors that was talking in this documentary said, it's pretty accepted that it's 1 in 4 around, that known pregnancies that end in a miscarriage. She's like, but given what we know about how often people don't even realize they're pregnant, it's more likely that it's closer to 50% of pregnancies ending in a miscarriage, some just so early on. And that number stood out to me, when I was like, wow, half of all pregnancies potentially. Now, this is not a confirmed statistic because you can't confirm it when you don't know somebody is pregnant. You can't consider it a miscarriage, but so many happen so early on that this is just a very natural part of the process of going through wanting to have a family. And it doesn't appear so natural when you don't know the statistics behind it. It feels really scary and uncommon, but it is very common.
Wow. I'm like speechless at that number.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying about, you can't confirm, because how can you study something when it's, it's a guess based on people not knowing. But wow, if you asked me to guess like what that doctor said, I would not have gone that high. No way. Oh my God. Wow. Yeah. And I appreciate the clarification, Maria, around the idea that we're not sharing your story in an attempt to have our listeners like come away with this sense of like, well, this is everyone's story. This is what this is like. Obviously that's not our goal. Our goal really is to provide one story, one person's experience, and to like just have an open conversation about something that a lot of folks have a hard time having an open conversation about, or haven't had the opportunity to listen to other people have a conversation about. So yeah, I don't expect people to walk away necessarily thinking like, wow, like I just heard my own story reflected back to me or something like that. But yeah, just like normalize the talking about it. I would say if there's one goal for me, and I don't know, Maria, it sounds like you're sort of similar in this. I think the one goal is like normalize just the talking about it, not necessarily the details of the story, but the fact that it's okay to talk about these things. And in fact, it can be really helpful. And so maybe that's a good segue, because I know you were saying that you're a very verbal processor, and that part of the reason that you've come to where you are now in terms of your healing and your ability to talk about it in a grounded way is really because of a lot of the healing work that you've done, the purposeful and intentional steps that you took to like face your grief and like kind of move through it, accept it. So I don't know where you would like to start, but I'm kind of curious to talk about like after the physical experience of miscarrying was complete. Well, I am actually a little curious about like how your body felt in the weeks afterwards, but also emotionally, like, how did things kind of unfold for you for those next couple of weeks right after?
Yeah, absolutely. I could start with the physical because I think that that's more of a cut and dry kind of answer of, well, this is what I observed my body do after the miscarriage. For me, the symptoms of pregnancy that I started to experience, such as slight nausea, a little bit of hunger, sore breasts, being really, really tired, like passing out on the couch at 8 p.m., which is unlike me. Those symptoms faded fairly quickly, which was interesting. And I found that to be bittersweet in a way. Bitter because I wanted the symptoms, because that tells you that your body is doing the changes or going through the changes that it needs to in order to prepare for a baby to grow inside of you. So bitter that I was losing those symptoms, but sweet in the sense that I had pretty quickly come to for me, the understanding that my body knew what it was doing when it was miscarrying. For me, that was something that I was able to hold on to. And I know that is something that a lot of women are told when they miscarry, like your body knew what it was doing. It's better that it did it now, right? You hear a lot of these kind of phrases that are meant to be really comforting. And in the immediacy of the miscarriage, it's not super comforting. But I think that the sooner you can get to holding on to a view or like a world view almost of conceptualizing the miscarriage, the sooner you can get to that understanding for yourself, whatever that understanding might be, the quicker the healing can happen. So the sweet part of losing the physical symptoms was, okay, my body is getting back to normal, which is the preparation for what's next, which is trying to conceive again. So the physical symptoms kind of faded away as far as the pregnancy symptoms are concerned. And really you just kind of, you bleed for about a week or so, like a heavy period, I'd say, after the initial release of whatever is inside of your uterus. You kind of just are releasing and shedding the lining as you would your period every month. But it's just a bit heavier because your lining is a bit thicker now that there was a pregnancy established in there. So that was the physical piece of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting because I was imagining that you might feel kind of like tired and run down, like almost like you would feel like if you had your period. But what you point out makes a lot of sense. You were already feeling the symptoms of the pregnancy, which involved a lot of feeling tired because your body is spending so much energy. That it makes, what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think the tired aftermath, like I think the feeling of being tired after the miscarriage was less because of the physical release of the pregnancy and more because of the emotional burden of the miscarriage.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I could see how that type of tired feeling like would be different. You would feel it differently. Yeah, I get that.
It definitely feels differently as it manifests in your body because it's for a different reason that you're feeling tired.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I
was just thinking through all of the other things that you said, and I really loved, and like it struck a chord with me when you were saying that the sooner you can if you're going through a miscarriage, as far as like the healing journey goes, the sooner you can come to some sort of way of making sense of what has happened, like a way to sort of conceptualize it. I don't know if I want to say like give meaning to it, but like that it doesn't necessarily feel like this just like totally senseless, meaningless, like unfair, like why did this happen kind of thing. Like I think about how we process grief around lots of different life events, and what you said sticks out to me. You know, I think about how we talk about, like we hear the phrase like everything happens for a reason, this is how it was meant to be, or like one door closes, another door opens. Like there are a lot of these like cliche phrases that I think we as humans have kind of, the reason they became cliches in the first place is because we use them to like give meaning to our struggles and like to look at the things that are hard and find a way of like making sense of it so that we can move forward. So I think what you said made a lot of sense. And yeah, I'd love to hear you talk more about like coming to that, and then like from there, what your path has been like.
Yeah, I think it's a good segue into the emotional piece of the aftermath, right? So for me, I think in order to have gotten to the place where I just described and you just summarized, it took allowing the hurt to be there. And I think that with grief, we tend to be, as a society, pretty adverse to the idea of grief or to the experience of it. But when you could break down grief into something that's just, you know, we experience grief on a very regular basis. It doesn't have to be the loss of life. It could be the loss of a job or the loss of a relationship, right? And there's grief in loss, no matter what the loss looks like. So when it comes to looking at something from a perspective of like how we're both therapists, right? So when I am helping clients to process grief, I encourage them to sit with the discomfort of it.
Not avoid it.
Not avoid it, exactly. And not in a way that's traumatizing, right? In a way that is with safe people in a safe place, so that it's not something we're just kind of stuffing down and then it's coming out in other ways. So in order for me to not avoid my feelings, my immediate response after realizing I miscarried and kind of going through the first few days of it, I allowed the processing of it because I knew there was going to be this release of a lot of things in my body, whether it be the symptoms as we just talked about, or release of other things through, you know, as if it looks like, I don't know how to describe it other than saying like it looks like a period. But, I was like, Sometimes there's just not a good word for something,
Well, and I mean, I think that's one of the things is like when we don't talk about things a lot and like we don't talk about miscarriage a lot, frankly, as a society, we don't talk about periods a lot. I think in my lifetime, I've seen that change. And I don't know if that's a product of the people I surround myself with or the line of work that I'm in. But yeah, the things that we don't talk, one of the consequences of the things that we don't talk about is that we don't have as like rich of language for it.
Yeah.
So here we are just kind of stumbling our way through because these are the descriptions that we have.
Yeah. No, and I'm also finding myself holding back saying certain things, being cognizant of who the audience might be and not wanting to trigger any really strong emotional responses for people. And some images or even descriptions of images might be really hard for people. So I'm trying to be mindful of that as well as I describe things. Because I think we don't know exactly who's watching and we want to make sure that we're being respectful of their experience and what they might have gone through. But getting back on track, yes. So the first thing is just feeling it to heal it. It is something that I say often. And then immediately getting myself surrounded with my social supports, right? So for me, that's a very natural next step. That's not natural for everybody, but it's something that I really encourage for people going through any difficult life experience, but especially one that you haven't created meaning from yet, as you just said, Steph, right? Because surrounding yourself with social support and love can give you a little bit more of the space that you might need in order to develop that meaning, in order to come up with what it is that this experience has done to you and means for you. So I called my therapist and I immediately said, hey, I know we don't see each other super often, but this is what happened. And here's what I would like to do, set up an appointment. The second thing was I'm blessed enough to have my mom around, and she stayed through the week of it, the aftermath of the miscarriage. And having a supportive partner is extremely, extremely helpful. And again, not everybody has that. So if you don't have what I would quote unquote put typical supports, right? A husband, a mother, a therapist, maybe look for the people in your life, look towards the people in your life that fulfill those supportive roles, and ask them to come hang out, ask them to come sit and watch a movie, because you're not going to feel all that much like moving a ton in the few days after. You're really uncomfortable. You're wearing what feels like a diaper. I mean, it's not a comfortable experience. So doing things that, or putting things around you purposefully and intentionally that do create some comfort can counteract the discomfort that's naturally going to be there because of the experience. So that would be step one. Step two, knowing that it's going to suck and experiencing it anyway. Yeah. Like sitting in the discomfort, to a point. If you have a professional support system like a therapist or a coach or a priest, wherever you gain that kind of emotional support from, make an appointment. And then of course, surrounding yourself with the social supports that you have in your life, and being open as to what happened. It's scary to say it out loud, but it does tend to feel better after the fact. And I think I mentioned this in our last recording, that as soon as I started sharing with the people that are closer to me in my life, I realized so much about so many women in my life. I think I said this, I have so much knowledge about their personal experiences, but I did not know so many of the close women in my life had also experienced miscarriages until I decided to share. And having that like meeting of the minds and meeting of experiences did create some level of soothingness for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I'm really appreciating everything you're saying, and I'm like thinking about myself, people I know, people I work with. The piece you were talking about feel it to heal it, I think is one of the really like misunderstood things that therapists know and talk about a lot, but that a lot of the general public or people who haven't necessarily like been to therapy or studied the process might not understand. Like, I think that the idea of sitting in discomfort is, and you did a beautiful job talking about this, it's not about like ruminating. It's about like, you know, you're standing facing the ocean. There's nothing you can do to stop a wave from crashing. It's just letting it crash. It's not like, you know, building up a wall in the sand to try to prevent it. And then that's not going to work. And, you know, and I think sometimes people don't really get that. And you're right. I think that is really important. It's not necessarily saying like, oh, I need to sit with my discomfort, so let me just like get comfortable in a chair and just, you know, think about how sad I am. No, it's about like, I feel sad. I can notice and recognize that I feel sad. And I'm not going to tell myself that I'm wrong for feeling this way. I'm not going to necessarily try and figure out like how I can make this feeling go away as fast as possible. I'm just going to sort of turn towards that feeling and open myself up to just like be aware of it. You know, this feeling is here. This is what it feels like in my body. Maybe it's hard, but I'm just going to kind of let it have its moment, you know?
Yeah. I think I love the metaphor of the wave. I actually use that quite a bit when I talk to clients too. If I can further that metaphor just for a second, I'd love to do that to further that explanation that yes, it's something that we know, right? Feeling it to heal it is something that I have learned and practiced and talked about and learned, I mean, for years now. But when you're faced with that wave coming and it looks really scary, yeah, you want to build up a wall or a fortress, or you want to run away from it. But that doesn't stop the wave, as you just described. So I think that first initial recognition and acknowledgement of the fact that the wave is coming is equivalent to recognizing and acknowledging the sadness is there. The next part that I spoke about, which was finding the support systems and kind of gaining that meaning or developing that meaning as to what happened for you is more or less, instead of letting the wave crash on top of you and feel that almost like the fear or the scariness of that and almost feel like you're drowning. And I think that's why people don't want to feel really uncomfortable feelings, because it can feel suffocating. You can feel like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to swim through this, right? So I'm just not going to. But doing the additional pieces and doing that work where you sit with it, but also gain the support and gain some skill sets is equivalent to learning how to ride a wave in.
Yeah.
Right. So while we might not be able to stop a wall of water coming at us, we can safely get to shore if we know how to swim, if we know how to float, if we know how to utilize the currents to our advantage. So I think that metaphor really provides a wonderful visualization or visual of how healing or feeling it to heal it looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that connection. And and then I think about like the cyclical nature of like emotions and how that fits this metaphor too, because the wave crashes, it feels really tumultuous, and then the water is calm. But then other waves come, it's not like, we ride the wave and then we're done, but it's also not like we ride the wave indefinitely. We sort of alternate between periods of tumultuous challenge and things like that and periods of calm. And I love the idea of riding the wave rather than letting it just like knock you over and throw you around. Like, there are things that are within our control that we can't stop the wave, but we can make our journey easier for ourselves. And the idea of seeking social support is, as you were talking about, one of the things that you were able to do that feels really important. And I think what you were saying too about the social supports and like the acknowledgement that people don't always have those folks in their life, and is so important. And I think like in general, I think that's true when we're talking about like dealing with grief and loss. and pain. And also just like in terms of like the pregnancy journey and the journey of starting a family in general, having social support is so important. I mean, I know so many people who may have gone through miscarriage, may have not, but who have gotten to the point of actually having a baby and felt really alone or not alone and really like appreciative of the people around, because it's a lot of hard work, and so cultivating relationships with safe people that we can turn to in times of need is so important. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with someone who may not have those things. I think it's a privilege to have those things. And if we notice that we don't have a lot of strong social supports, like what can we do to begin to build them? Like, are there communities that we can reach out to? Can we get started with a therapist or a coach, or seek like a religious person that we might feel a connection to? Or, what kinds of options do we have for getting in touch with other people who will like meet us warmly and supportively where we are? Even if it's not like the sort of traditional, partner, family of origin, like sibling, friend, whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well said. Well said.
And I want to add, I also think that there's value in, and again, like I'm maybe speaking more generally than about like the miscarriage experience specifically, but in general, I think like sometimes the people who are closest to us in terms of like life bonds, like blood family relationships, or like the people who live in our household, our partners, whatever, like the sort of people we might think of as being like the closest to us sometimes don't always have the skills to support us in the way that we really need. And so being able to think, and so I think this is hard when like grief is really intense. This might be something more to think about during calmer times, to then be prepared to turn to social supports when things are really hard. But like being able to think to yourself, like, okay, what characteristics of the people around me are helpful to me when I'm really in crisis? Like, who are the people that are not just like have been in my life for a long time or have like a close tie to me, but like in terms of like the quality of the interaction, like who is going to just like come over and sit with me in my grief, put on a movie, and like I'm going to feel that sense of warm connection? Like, who do I know that's not going to jump to the giving of solutions and offering advice, but who's going to just sort of meet me where I am and be with me through that? Maybe it's those sort of traditional folks, maybe it's not. And if you would rather reach for your friend who you haven't talked to in 2 years, but who you always have these really strong like feelings of warmth and support from, rather than like maybe your mom, even though your mom's like maybe talks to you more, if you feel like you have a tense relationship with her, or some, your sister, whoever, it's okay to reach for the person that is going to make you feel most supported, even if that's not who you think it should be. You know what I mean? So anyway, I think we kind of moved out to like some more general stuff, but certainly like the more general stuff applies, I think.
Of course it does. Yeah. It's a unique life circumstance having miscarriage, but it's also just as any other difficult life circumstance. What do you do when sadness hits? What do you do when grief hits? And kind of bringing it back to the aftermath and utilizing that wave metaphor again, like it does come randomly and hit you again. And what I found for me, so if we're talking about the emotional experience, not just the day after a miscarriage or the week or the 2 weeks, but we're talking now, I think I'm 2 months out from when it happened, right? So even now, when I go to the bathroom and am expecting my period, or I feel a little twinge in my lower abdomen, those feelings could be very triggering for people, because it feels very similar. The experience of PMS into your menstrual cycle of having your period versus being pregnant and not getting your period very similar experiences, very similar experiences. I know, and this, again, this might be a little, the description of it might be a little bit difficult for some people. So I'm just saying that out loud. So if that's you, just to be aware of that. This most recent cycle that I went through, I thought I might be pregnant, right? So you go through this excitement and like almost relief of like, oh yes, like it happened again really quickly. Like, yay, I'm so excited. And then you go through the dip of a loss, even though there really isn't a loss because I was never pregnant. So it turns out I wasn't pregnant and I got my period, a little bit late. But the symptoms that I experienced leading up to this particular period were very similar to when I was pregnant. Yeah. So you start being, at least for me, I'm very hyper aware of my physical sensations. And that's true for me across the board. It's not just particular to this circumstance, but being as aware as I am of my physical experience and my bodily experiences, it does present some kind of like, I call it a revertigo experience where you're like, oh, this is this. And again, that word can be used in that term could be used in a lot of different examples. But for me, I'm talking about it particular to pregnancy and miscarriage. It brings you back slightly to that moment, which is why processing is so important. Because if I didn't process and come to the other side of this loss in a healthy way, I might feel re-traumatized every time I get my period, because seeing blood or feeling cramps, having some pregnancy-like symptoms, even if I'm not pregnant, all of those things feel so parallel to the experience that I went through 2 months ago. So that's why I say, and I encourage really strongly, that even though it's hard to face such a sad moment, the sooner you do it, the more healthy your mind and body can be for future pregnancies, if that's what your goal is. And if pregnancy isn't your goal after a miscarriage, the sooner your mind and body could be healthy for whatever challenge you're going to meet next in life. So that's been interesting though. The months after being like, oh, maybe I'm pregnant. And there's this 2-week wait that if you start, once you're in the like fertility journey and all your social media is bombarded with fertility treatments and teas and bath soaks and anything you can think of, you name it, they have it. You come across these different terms. And one of the terms in the fertility community is the 2-week wait. And it's like a dreaded 2-week wait for people who have either experienced a miscarriage or who have been trying for some period of time. And this 2 weeks is indicative of the period of time after you've ovulated to when your period comes. There's
right.
About 2 weeks.
Did you get pregnant?
Correct.
You cried. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So every twinge, every slight nausea feeling, every, breast ache, you're like, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And so one of the things that I've had to do, and my partner's been really helpful in this area, has been to, again, experience whatever that little symptom is, but then bring it back to the present moment of the uncertainty is still there. We don't know if you're pregnant and you have to wait to find out. There's no way around the wait. So creating excess anxious energy by ruminating about a symptom here and there can be more harmful than helpful. So, I say that to kind of speak to the women out there who might be ruminating over a symptom or getting really anxious over that 2-week wait. And I understand, it's totally reasonable to have those feelings of anxiety or stress related to that, especially given a loss prior to now. So I think that might be helpful at some point to talk about, like, how do you relax your body? How do you relax your mind when you're so anxiously and excited for a potential result?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about two things. Like I heard you say that there was like the sort of physical experience of having a period and both like the visual reminder and the like sensation reminder of the miscarriage when you were having your period. And so like had you not done some of the processing that you did, that might feel really triggering. But then the other, so there's that piece. That's one of the like sort of post miscarriage challenges. And then one of the other things that I heard you say, which miscarriage or not, like lots of folks who are trying to get pregnant deal with this sort of feeling, but perhaps especially after a miscarriage is, and I think we talked about this in the last episode, is that part of that loss, whether it's loss of a confirmed pregnancy or the sort of loss at the end of the 2-week wait, the loss of the idea that maybe I got pregnant this month is the loss of the imagined future. Like based on what I know or suspect or believe or hope, I'm imagining that this is what the future will bring. And when I confront the reality that that is not what the future will bring, if that's a future I was really excited about and looking forward to, that's sad, that's hard. And I was thinking about that a lot as I was listening to you. That felt really present in what you were saying, especially about the idea of like, you know, it seems very like not unexpected to me that your cycle after a miscarriage might be perhaps a little bit longer than you're used to, or that there might be something about it that's different. There are lots of things that can affect like the length of a person's menstrual cycle. And I assume very much that miscarriage is going to be one of those things. But to then have your cycle go a little longer than you expected and to have that thought of like, well, we did try again and maybe, you know, it could be, this is not impossible. And it feels so similar. And yeah, so the idea of like the sort of hope of that possibility that comes in.
Yeah. You know, it's very real and very present. And, you know, so what did the doctors say about waiting? What did the providers say about what can you expect after a miscarriage as far as your fertility is concerned? So the research out there, if you do any research through Google, you'll see that there's some evidence supporting that your body is more receptive to a pregnancy after a miscarriage. They say due to your uterus having been prepped prior, you know, from the previous pregnancy, or because of the hormones still present in your body from the previous pregnancy. It might make for a more inviting environment for a pregnancy to occur again soon after, within the 3 months following a miscarriage. There's some evidence and research that supports that. And the providers, my providers said to me that the best thing you can do is wait till you have your first cycle and then start trying again. There's no, they specify that there's no actual harm in trying right away after the miscarriage, but your body is still really vulnerable and really healing. And so are your emotions, like your whole emotional being is still healing. So just letting your body kind of get reset again could be very helpful. I found that was helpful to allow just a little bit of time. I didn't wait very long. So I didn't necessarily wait for my cycle to finish before trying again, but I didn't have any high expectations of that first month after.
Yeah.
And there are some articles out there from different, bodies of work that talk about how it's really important to wait a significant amount of time. But I want to point out that there's absolutely, from what I've researched, I cannot find any real research supporting the need to wait super long times after a miscarriage. So be encouraged, I suppose, is the message here. Be encouraged that you want your body to kind of get back to a reset point, or allow it to get to a point where it feels like you've reset both emotionally and physically. And then if pregnancy is your goal, have you have all the time in the world at that point to continue trying, and there's nothing stopping you at that point to get pregnant again. One of the things that came up for me a lot was, well, does this miscarriage indicate a larger problem? And in speaking to other women, that tends to be a pretty present thought as well for them.
That makes sense. Well, and especially
Right?
given that most people, I think, at least from my experience, don't seem to know quite what the statistics are in terms of how common miscarriage is. And I think if you believe that it's this really rare, unlikely thing that happened to you but doesn't happen very often, the conclusion of like what might be wrong with me is an understandable thought.
Yeah,
Even
absolutely.
if there's
Absolutely.
totally nothing wrong with you. I can see why people would think that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there are some just like biological standards of age that come into play, right? And then there's societal pressure of age that comes into play as far as, well, maybe if I started trying when I was younger, maybe this wouldn't have happened. And you could easily go down this rabbit hole of, well, maybe this is an indication that there's a larger problem at play here. One miscarriage in and of itself with no other complications that had, that were discovered throughout the process of the miscarriage does not have any weight. Let me rephrase that. One miscarriage in and of itself, without any other complications that were discovered throughout the process of the miscarriage, does not indicate a larger problem. But one of the things that one of the midwives said to me that I found really helpful was, I don't know, Maria, if you're the type of person that needs to know more information or less information, because I don't know you all that well yet. She's like, but don't let somebody pressure you into not finding out more information or finding out more information. Do what feels right for you in this moment. So what the conversation was longer, but to summarize what I took from that conversation was, one, it was very supportive and I really appreciated that. Very trauma informed. And I could really like hear it in how she was talking to me. But secondly, is that there's this standard of like, well, you should try for a year before you even consider there might be a problem, right? As with your fertility. That is a pretty like accepted standard in this.
I've heard that a lot.
Yeah. There's also this accepted standard of like, well, one miscarriage, as I just said, doesn't equate to a larger problem. But if you have 2 or 3, maybe there's something that you should check out. I was talking to a naturalist, a practitioner, a more holistic practitioner recently about different hormonal testing, unrelated to this topic, but her specialty happens to be women's health as well. So we got on the topic of it. And her take on it, of course, given her lens, is it doesn't hurt to know your levels of hormones. If you're in this preconception phase, it can just be more information that's helpful to you. So you could go back and forth, but ultimately it's really up to the woman who's going through it. Do you want this information sooner rather than later? You don't necessarily need to wait for that typical 1-year standard. I know so many women who have not waited and not listened to that provider recommendation. And it was a good thing that they did, because they actually were having trouble with ovulating. So they would have waited a year and then found out that there was some trouble with their ovulation, and then started at that point some medications that might trigger more regular ovulation. And so for them, it was a positive thing that they went and looked for more information. But I know the other side as well from speaking to a lot of women, that sometimes going down that rabbit hole causes more stress than actual support or help. So you have to know you well, know your body, and know your mind, know what's going to be helpful for you, and seek it out. If finding out earlier than a year about your hormonal balance is really going to support your fertility journey, then I encourage you to do that. If you know it's going to create more rumination, then maybe find other ways to relax and calm your mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. It makes me think about like costs some of these tests, services, things. And I don't know if you know from your own experience, but like hormone testing, things like that. I don't know the answer to this. Is that typically covered by most insurance? I'm thinking no, right? Yeah, it's like
usually until there's what they consider medical necessity, right?
Yeah.
And that's usually comes after somewhere around 6 months to a year of trying. And some people want to know sooner than that. I wanted to know about my genetic history sooner since I had this miscarriage. So I paid out of pocket for that test because it wasn't considered medically necessary at this point for me to get it. But that is a really great point, Steph, that not everybody has access or the financial freedom to do that. So that just goes into a whole other topic about barriers to women's healthcare and all sorts of conversations that we can have about that.
Yeah, I'll stop myself from going down that rabbit hole because I'll be there for a while. Yeah. Do you mind if I ask what that type of thing cost?
Not at all. Not at all. That particular genetic test that I did, it was a blood test, and that cost, I think out of pocket was like $150, something like that. When I was talking to this naturopath doctor, I was asking her what the cost of certain hormone panels would be, and they can range from, $250 to $500 to get the actual results. And then from there, you have to pay for, of course, the practitioner who has skills in that area to be able to read the results with you. So it's not an inexpensive undertaking, for sure.
Yeah.
There are other things, though, that people can do that are less costly to get some more information about their body if they're interested in it. And once you start typing in anything about pregnancy, your social media, if you have social media, will be bombarded with products. But the one thing that I did, and I'll only speak from my experience, since this is the one product I did buy as far as gaining more knowledge about my cycle, was ovulation test prediction kits. So it's not a test that will tell you definitively if you're ovulating, but it's a test that tests certain hormones called luteinizing hormone within your urine. And the science behind it is that when your luteinizing hormone spikes during the month, it's in that period of time that I think it's a 36 to 72 hour window that you should be ovulating within that, from that luteinizing hormone spike. And so that doesn't, again, it's not definitive that you have ovulated, but it's one predictor that can help you know what's going on in your body with a simple urine test. And you can get them online, like on Amazon for pretty cheap. And then there's free apps that are associated with certain testing kits that help kind of track it for you. The reason I say that is because that's a pretty inexpensive way to get some information, like, well, maybe my ovulation or maybe this luteinizing hormone spike is really irregular during my cycle. That can be an indication of a potential issue, right? It could be an indication of nothing, but it also could be helpful information to provide to your midwife or to your OBGYN to say, hey, listen, I've been tracking this for 2-3 months now, and I'm noticing A, B, or C. What do you think that might mean, if anything, about my fertility? And that's an inexpensive way to get some more information about your body.
Cool. That's good. Yeah, that's good. It's good to think about, like, if some things are not accessible, what is, if I want to learn more, what can I do? What's within my control? What's within my budget? Things like that. Cool.
And the least expensive or not expensive at all way, so the free way to kind of understand your body, is to tune into it more. And that's something that I encourage any woman I work with, any person I work with, really, but specifically if I'm talking about women's healthcare, I really encourage them to tune into their cycle. And this is something, Steph, that you encouraged me to do a long time ago, and it's really helpful. Just understanding how long is your cycle, what happens during this week for you when it comes to your emotions, when it comes to your physical experience of your cycle, and getting to know your body better never hurt anyone.
Yeah. So I want to ask another question. This is a little bit of a pivot, like subject change a little bit, but we've been recording for a bit and I want to try to get to it before we run out of time today. And that is, you acknowledge it's only been 2 months, but you have resumed trying. And so I was curious if you would be willing to speak a little bit about your experience of trying after having had a miscarriage. Like, have you noticed that it feels different? I don't mean necessarily your experience of the 2-week wait, but of the actual, like, not to like pry into your sexual relationship, but like that sort of relational kind of like the act of trying to conceive. Does it feel different to you in some way having had this experience?
So the short answer is no, but the long answer is no, because I'm really intentional about it. So it doesn't feel all that different because I'm really working hard for it to not feel all that different. So I think that it can for a lot of women. And the reason that I would assume it feels different is because of the fact that sex becomes something more than just an act of enjoyment between you and your partner. It becomes a means to an end, right?
Yeah.
And
right.
And now, you have all this information about your cycle and when you're most fertile and when you should be having sex to maximize your chances of conceiving. So the change for me in my relationship is, I think we're just a little bit more mindful of our timing, but we're really cognizant of not being hyper focused about that either. Both of us are in the mindset of, if we are, in love and enjoying each other's company and enjoying each other's presence, that is how we want our fertility journey to look. So we're very intent on making that part of our journey, because that's important to us, right? However,
so you have like a shared intention of like, when you're sexual together, you're like, the focus of this is on our love, our connection, our presence. We're going to do everything that we can mentally to not make this like a job that we're completing. We're really bringing the attention to like the quality of the experience. And like, yeah, we're being mindful about when in the month we are, having sex, but we're also focusing on each other and the connection first and foremost.
Yes, perfect summary. Mm-hmm.
I love that. That makes perfect sense.
But I want to say that that's not the case for everybody, and I can understand why. And so I want to just like validate people's experience if that's not how they're able to go about their fertility journey. It's hard. It's really hard to not be hyper focused when you want something so bad, and that goes for anything in life. But I've talked to a number of women, and they are extremely hyper focused on that ovulation period of time when they're most able to conceive according to their cycle. And it can become work. It can become work for them. And that is a very understandable result of trying for a long time, or loss, or just really, really wanting something really badly. Yeah. And so I don't, I have no judgment towards that experience or that kind of way that people's relationship goes. That's just not how mine is at this point. And that may be because it's not been super long that we've been trying. It also may be just because of the work that I do and that my partner does, that we do together to continue to make it an enjoyable experience for both of us.
Well, and it brings to my mind, again, like taking this specific conversation and topic and moving to generalities, like kind of moving back and forth, I think like in general, what you're talking about is an illustration of how valuable it is for us as human beings to bring a level of mindfulness and intention to the things that we're doing, and how that level of mindfulness and intention can really transform our experiences, especially when it's something that we're practicing regularly. I think a lot of people who are struggling with a high amount of anxiety feel like their thoughts are in control, and don't have practice turning that around. Like we don't have control over our emotions, but we do have control over our thoughts. Can we stop ourselves from having intrusive thoughts? No, not necessarily. Can we always get control of our ruminating? No, I don't mean to be minimizing or dismissive or suggest it's just like so easy, but we do have the ability to say, I am going to put my focus and attention on X. And when I do that, how do I feel? I mean, this is like the basic formula of mindfulness work, right? And so when you practice that regularly, it's like a skill that you can build. It's like a muscle that you can grow. And so I think like you, Maria, in your work, do this like all the time. I've heard you talk about mindfulness so much. And so it doesn't surprise me that, that would have applications for the process of trying to get pregnant, that you would be able to like bring that same level of like, I'm bringing intentional and mindful awareness and focus to this. I'm paying attention to my feelings of love for my partner. I'm paying attention to feel like the sensations that I'm feeling in my body that are pleasant, that are pleasurable, that are enjoyable. That doesn't mean that I'm not ever going to have a thought about what if we're conceiving right now, but what it means is you're not necessarily going to react to that thought by getting completely pulled out of the moment and like going down a rabbit hole in which you're no longer present, which I think, to your point, like lots of people maybe aren't as practiced at mindfulness, or maybe their thoughts feel really powerful and they do get kind of mentally pulled out of the moment by some of these big possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could have said it better, honestly. That was really, really well said, Steph. Yeah. And even with somebody like myself who has practiced mindfulness and has that as a daily part of my life, my thoughts run away with me sometimes, and they take me out, just like any experience on a regular basis. Sometimes your thoughts take you out of the moment, and it does create an experience of anxiety or an experience of sadness, depending upon, maybe you're really tired that day and you just don't have the mental capacity to be super mindful and present because of a vulnerability factor. Maybe you had a really bad day at work. I mean, there's 100 things that could be going on for somebody to take them out of the moment of enjoying time with their partner. But I think just if more times than not, you can be intentional about putting your energy and awareness onto the enjoyment of time with your partner, then the result is more often than not enjoyment.
Yeah. I think it would be really cool for us to do an episode in the future about like sex when trying.
I think it would be really helpful for people. Yeah. I think
because
so.
One of the other things I was thinking about when you were talking about like how for a lot of women it becomes like, it can feel like a job, and no judgment to that. And, it got me thinking about, like, obviously, as you know, I'm a sex therapist, and I've heard a lot of men talk about that pressure to perform. And like for men, like when we're trying to conceive, the sort of pressure to ejaculate, because without that, that's not going to happen, and whereas like, for a woman, like if you have an orgasm, great. And from what I understand, that can be potentially helpful in making, the increasing the likelihood of conception, but it's not necessary. Whereas for a male partner, it is necessary. And so I've worked with people who really sort of struggle with the like oh my God, this is not about, like, I have to do this job. Like I have to, so, and I've worked with couples where this presents like a relational challenge. So I think that would be a really interesting episode to talk more about it another time.
I agree. So I think we'll end episode 3 there then. I hope people feel encouraged. Hope people feel open to share with people that they feel, supported by. At some level, if it's, maybe there's a way at some point that we can create, a forum for people to share their feelings if they don't have that social support, as you were talking about, like, how do we create it for those who don't naturally have it in their lives? And because that's one of the goals of this podcast is creating the essence or the feeling of a village-like support system.
I love that idea.
So thanks, Steph. I appreciate your time, as always.
Yeah. And I appreciate yours and all of your vulnerability and honesty with this topic. It's been great talking to you about it.
Yeah, you too. Well, we'll be back soon. So thanks.
Stay tuned, everybody.